My father was disciplined with the belt, with his fist occasionally. He would chase us around the house till he cornered us. But he always disciplined in anger, and he was quickly angered. And the result was that he raised angry children. We were raised in the Roman Catholic faith, and both my parents would be in church on Sunday, but there was no reality at home. And as a young boy, I would go to Mass sometimes in the mornings, before even the nuns would get there. I'd be the only one in the church with the nuns. And I would stare at the tabernacle in the darkness, and I would come up and kneel at the railing sometimes, and I would want God to come out of that box so that I could see him. I felt that the answer to my problems would be to get away from my dad. But I was developing an anger problem. I decided to join the Navy because my father was in the Air Force, and I figured that that would be the greatest distance I can put between us. I was court-martialed 7 times in 3.5 years. I went to the brig 6 times, 5 times for going AWOL and once for assaulting an officer with a frying pan. In the end, though, I finally wound up doing a 6-month sentence up at the naval prison in Portsmouth. I always felt like if I could get out of the Navy, just like I felt if I could leave home, then my problems would be over. 3.5 years later, I was living in Manchester, New Hampshire. I had one job after another. I had 35 jobs by the time I was 30 years old. But then finally, when I would get to the point where I was in between jobs, I would break into businesses at night, and primarily the robbery of the drive-in theater. We robbed a ticket taker, but got caught for it 3 days later, and so I got a 1 to 5 year sentence. I served 13 months on that. I thought getting out of my father's house was the answer. Wasn't. I thought getting out of the Navy was the answer. It wasn't. I thought leaving this job after job after job, whatever job I was in, if I wasn't happy, I'd find another one. There's a verse in Isaiah 57, 20 and 21, that says, "The wicked are like the tossing sea, which cannot rest, whose waves toss up muck and mire. There is no peace, says my God, for the wicked." That was me to a T. But my father had a heart attack that coincided with the news of hearing that his son was in prison. And some relatives in Manchester told me. And so I'm struck with, I gave my father a heart attack. And I started bawling like a baby right there at the gate. But he survived it, and God gave him another 15 years after that. I was a salesman for a brief amount of time. It was going to be a short-lived job, as most of my jobs were. I liked to talk to people, but I didn't have the heart to sell them anything. I can remember knocking on a pastor's door, a little Baptist church. He shared Christ with me immediately. I'm talking about cleaning chemicals, and he'd say things like, well, you know, Jesus can clean your life up. And his wife, they were like a tag team. His wife came out to talk to me. And he went and answered the phone. And she took up right up where he left off and starts talking about Jesus. And then she asked me, where do you think you would go if you died tonight? And I was, good time, Charlie. I said, I'll go to heaven. She looked right at me and she said, well, I'm afraid to tell you this, Lennie, but God is going to say, depart from me, you worker of iniquity, because I never knew you. Good time, Charlie needed a spear thrown right at his heart. I'm a worker of iniquity. I knew that was bad. Wasn't sure what it meant, but I knew it was bad. That I was a sinner. And that's what I needed to hear. I needed to know I was in a whole heap of trouble. Then they had us over, my wife and I. At that time, the pastor said the statement that threw the second spear. He said, do you believe that God is loving? And I said, yeah, God is loving. He says, then why don't you think he would do something so loving as to send his son to die on a cross for your sins, if that's all he could do to make you right with himself? And the logic of that just penetrated. I wish I could tell you the day. I don't remember the exact day. I just remember it was sometime in the spring of 1975. I went from death to life. My wife was saved 2 months after me, and God restored our marriage. We were on the brink of divorce, and we didn't care. There was no love left in the marriage. And today I can't imagine life without her. You know, and it was that same pastor who directed me towards prison ministry. I was all done with prison. But there was a local ministry going on at the county jail, which was only 2 miles away from the church. And someone said, you know, there's an opportunity for people to go in and observe a service. So he says, why don't you go? You don't know if God might use that. But I didn't see the inmates really. All I felt was how it felt to be back there. And it rang all the old emotional bells for me. I went back the following Sunday, and all the emotional bells had disappeared. I was able to look into their eyes and see them, and I've never looked back. I can even remember guys' names who were in that audience that first night. I felt sensed, whatever word you want to use, that Jesus Christ was standing behind me. He was so strong, he was behind me to my right. That's where he was standing. And I felt, sensed, whatever you want to call it, he put his right hand on my right shoulder, and he said to me, I don't think it was audible, I just heard it loud and clear, this is what I want you doing. And because that was such a strong calling, I would not veer from that calling unless I had such a strong calling out of it. My father visited me after we'd become a Christian. We were now going into full-time prison ministry. And they came out from the West Coast. They were living in California. My mom and dad came out. And I remember sharing the gospel with my mom, and he was sitting just behind her, but the whole time he was nodding his head, and I could tell it was a genuine affirmation. And he wanted to go for a walk later. And we walked around the block. Didn't talk about anything that I can remember in particular. But towards the end of the walk, he put his arm on my shoulder. That was the most awkward thing I ever felt in my life, because he had never done that before. But I knew what he was trying to say. He was saying to me, son, I'm sorry. And I received that. And I really believe my father came to know the Lord in the last year of his life. He died shortly after. I even forgave him posthumously because I learned that you could do that. I was able to share clearly the gospel at my dad's funeral. It was at a Catholic church, and I remember the priest was looking at his watch. You know, I was talking longer than he was expecting me to. And his only brother came up to me with tears in his eyes and said, for the first time in my life, I understand. And I received a grace there, closure with my dad. I'll see my dad in heaven.
Thanks for watching. I hope you were blessed or encouraged by Lennie's amazing story of how God transformed him from an angry man to one of the kindest and happiest Christians I know. The Transform Project is a collection of true life stories of men and women with lives that have been transformed by Jesus Christ. Please consider liking or subscribing to help us share more stories like this. And if you want to learn how you can partner with us, please go to transformproject.com.